Morning to you. I'm Jeff Slakey. Happy to have some riveting radio real estate on the air with Don Pannell. Good morning.
Riveting. Good morning.
From John L. Scott here in Shelton. How you doing, Don?
I'm doing great.
What's up with the market?
Wanted to mention this morning we just got another notice from Lennox Scott, who is the John L. Scott latest rendition, saying that the Shelton market is unbelievably strong at this point.
Now, people in those positions don't use adjectives like that loosely.
They don't, no. So that's pretty amazing. The good news for sellers is that there's only about, I think it was 3.6 months of inventory in the Shelton area.
So what does that mean?
That means that if we sold everything that we have listed, it would take basically 3.6 months to sell everything. So that's, for sellers, that's phenomenal. So we've been talking for a while about if you want to sell your house, this is a really good time.
Now is a good time.
Yeah.
Does the weather help that too?
A little bit, yeah. Although I had always heard that the summer months were best, and it does take a little bit of an uptick, but it certainly doesn't mean that you don't list your house in the winter either, because we sell almost as much in the wintertime as we do in the summer. So it's kind of, my first year, January was my best month. The second year, it was like March or April. And then the third year, it was June or July. So you just don't know.
Do you ever get in the winter, do you ever get people coming in and buying a house as a present?
That's never happened. That's a great idea, though. I think that would be an awesome present.
You think about those car commercials in the Christmas time.
Right, where they have the big bow around the car. Right.
Outside.
I think that's a great idea. Let's push that.
Let's push that indeed. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. I'd love to help somebody with that. I'd even spring for a great big bow.
A bow, maybe a tree or something like that. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah.
Do you have some houses this morning you want to talk about?
I wanted to just mention a couple of vacant land parcels that I just listed up just a little bit north of Tillicum Beach, just outside of Hoodsport. They're very, very pretty. They're each over an acre of land, and they have power and water and phone to them. They would just need septic, and they need some pretty significant clearing. But once you did the clearing, and then there's a road to them that cuts in between the two, once you did some clearing, you'd have a phenomenal view of Hood Canal. So you can get some pretty reasonably priced land and then build on it and improve your investment significantly. I think the only issue we're having right now is the road needs some work on it, but the owner is working on that. We've contacted some excavating companies to give us a bid on getting that. I drove my SUV up there and almost got lost in the rut.
No.
It's pretty bad. So and then there's also a possibility that we might be listing the house that's built up on the top of the road. So it could be a good opportunity for somebody to buy possibly 3 parcels and then live in the house and develop the other 2, and they could have some pretty nice. Yeah, it's got some really. It's only about half a mile from the canal, so you've got some pretty views, and you can see out to the mountains and that kind of thing. So if somebody has some clearing land skills and some vision, this could be a good opportunity for them to get into the Hood Canal market while it's.
And you said it's just north of
just north of Tillicum Beach, yeah. So past Potlatch State Park.
Okay, yeah.
And then up onto, so it's on the left-hand side of the road as you're going north. So yeah, very pretty areas. So the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about today, we've been talking about all the addendums now that we've gone through the whole contract. So we started talking a little bit about the finance addendum, which is the main one that most people deal with. Unless you're paying cash, you're going to be dealing with this finance addendum. So the first thing you need to identify is what type of loan. And I think we talked a little bit about that, whether you're getting a conventional loan or an FHA loan or a VA loan. And we talked about at length about the importance of talking to your lender and making sure that you have that all locked in, so you know what kind of loan you're getting and that kind of thing, and how much money you're going to put down, all of those issues. So the next part is talks about the seller's right to that loan information. So once you fill out an offer for a house and it gets accepted, you have to realize that within 10 days usually the seller has a right to know what kind of loan you're getting and where you are in that process. So you need to make sure that you have that information available to you. If you don't, you run the risk of the seller being able to back out of the deal and possibly keeping your earnest money. If if you have said that you have financing lined up and you don't, that you put yourself at risk of losing your earnest money.
Does it matter to the seller what type of loan, or is it just that there is documentation that you've been approved, or essentially you're okay for a loan?
At this stage, it's just that you're okay for a loan, but it does. There are some impacts to the seller if you are getting a FHA or a VA loan, for example. Typically, the seller is asked to pay at least part of the closing costs for the buyer on those loans. Especially VA, the rule is that the veteran does not have to pay typical closing costs. So then that goes on to the buyer or to the seller's part. So you do have to be a little bit aware. If you absolutely refuse to even think about helping the buyer out with their closing costs, then you probably don't want to accept a VA or an FHA loan.
Interesting.
So,
I didn't know that one.
Yeah. You have to be. We always try and warn sellers when they're looking at offers to be sure and take that into account.
Yeah.
So, and then the next thing on there is the loan cost provisions, and that's what we just talked about. Whether the buyer is going to ask the seller to pay part or all of their closing costs, and typically those are between 3 and 4% of the price of the house. So again, if you as a seller say absolutely not, I'm not paying anybody else's closing costs, I have enough of my own, then you need to be aware of that line in the contract. So
when it comes to these addendums, we've been talking a lot financially, but are there ever stranger addendums that are found in the buyer's reports, or that they would like, or something that the seller... Has there ever been a point where a seller will write something in and says, my grandma planted the tree in the front yard, and it means a lot to us. I get that it's your house now, but...
Yeah, we're taking that with us.
Either we're taking it, or could you not cut it down?
Well, you can't say that you can't cut it down, because once the sale is finalized and the house becomes theirs,
it's theirs.
You don't. But what you can write into the contract, and I've seen a couple of times, is that we will take that rose bush or whatever with us. And so that becomes, and that's the next addendum that we'll talk about is called optional clauses.
Oh, okay, great.
And so that's where you put that kind of thing. So yeah, but that's actually fairly common. That,
okay.
I'm taking the rose bush, I'm taking the curtains, I'm taking, those kinds of things you can put in there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then the next thing that people generally have a question about is the whole earnest money issue.
Yeah.
And that is, earnest money is basically what the buyer is saying, how serious they are about this sale. So they're putting this money up front. And again, I always tell people that this check will be cashed.
Yeah. I
had a buyer early on that said, they took this money out of my account, and I said, well, yeah, it's a check. You wrote a check.
What do you expect?
So what happens with that earnest money for our office is that it gets turned into the title and escrow company. They cash it and hold it. They call it holding it in escrow, and then at the end of the process, that comes off the buyer's side of the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
So say you give $1,000 earnest money, then your what you owe at the end of the transaction is $1,000 less than it would have been otherwise. And there are reasons that you don't get that earnest money back. If you, for example, don't follow the rules and don't provide timely information, you run the risk of not getting that back. If you back out of the deal for not a good reason, you run the risk of not getting that earnest money back, and then typically that either goes directly to the seller, or the seller and the seller's agent split it based on some kind of a contract that they have.
If you decide to back out and you lose your earnest money, does that get noted anywhere for the next time you buy and a seller goes, well, is this guy serious or not serious?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I think it just is that just ends that transaction, and then you can go on to another. But as a realtor, I would certainly question that because I usually build in enough reasons for somebody to back out and get their earnest money back, that if you don't, there has to be something's going on, pretty egregious reason for not, that somebody just flaked out,
Yeah.
basically, and didn't. So an earnest money can be anywhere from a couple $100s to a couple $1,000, depending, and it's usually depending on the price of the property. So.
Very good.
And that gets held again you have 2 days after the offer has been accepted by both parties to get that earnest money turned in, and then it gets turned over to escrow and cashed and then held for that till the deal closes. And so the last one I want to talk about real quick is the whole appraisal issue. That's part of the financing addendum. Most lenders will require an appraisal that the buyer pays for, and that is a third party, supposed to be a complete hands-off transaction. The realtor doesn't really have any contact. The lender doesn't really have any contact. It's a totally unbiased person who goes out and presumably gives what the house is worth on the market. We've run into problems lately with appraisers going beyond just giving an amount and requiring a lot of repairs and things to be done. So you have to be prepared for that. That can happen.
Oh, really?
They'll say that, we'll give you the value of this house, but in order to get that, you have to do this, and this.
Well, that's almost what the inspector does.
Exactly. And so I don't want to badmouth the appraisal process, but it really is irritating to me.
It's a little outside the bounds, I would say.
Yeah, especially since the buyer is paying for a home inspection, presumably to address those issues. But sometimes if it's a VA or an FHA loan, again, then the appraiser has a little bit more leeway because VA and FHA requirements say that the roof will have X number of years on it, there will be no chipped paint, those kinds of things. So in that regard, they're within their bounds because FHA and VA have rules for those things. So just be aware that there will be an appraisal, and it will tell you how much that house is worth. If the amount that you offered and accepted on the house is less than that appraised value, then the seller can either pay for another appraisal themselves, or they can lower the sale price of the house to match what the appraised value is, or the buyer can say, hey, you know what, I want this house bad enough, I'm going to make up the difference between the appraised value and what I offered.
Okay.
And so there are several options that you can do. But that's always everybody's kind of bites their nails while we wait for that appraisal to come back.
I bet.
So, right. So that's the financing addendum, and next time we'll talk about another addendum that comes with the contract.
All right. How do people get in contact with you, Don?
They can call me at 490-4493, or they can stop by and see me at the John L. Scott office on the corner of 3rd and Railroad in downtown Shelton. I would love to talk to them and see if we can take advantage of this incredibly hot market that we have in Shelton right now.
Well, Don, thank you so much for coming on. We'll talk with you again in 2 weeks.
I won't be here in 2 weeks.
Okay.
But it'll be 4 weeks.
4 weeks.
Yes.
Oh man, that's like a month away.
I know. So people will just have to wait for their Riveting Radio real estate fix.
Also, go back and check the old shows online to learn more from Don Pannell.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Jeff.
It's 8:58 at iFiber One News Radio. That pretty much puts the wraps on the big show here today. I hope you have a great weekend. Seahawks football tomorrow, 11 o'clock pregame, 1:30 is the kickoff, and again, also tomorrow is the Taste of Hood Canal.
Everyone needs a health insurance plan, and now it's the law. Make